Legendary film composer Richard Sherman, along with his brother Robert, scored countless classic films during the golden age at the Walt Disney Studios, including The Jungle Book, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and The Aristocats. But perhaps the most iconic of them all was Mary Poppins, which recently celebrated its 50th anniversary and whose backstory served as the basis for the recent film Saving Mr. Banks. In January 2016, a musical showcase was put on in celebration of the University of Redlands giving Richard an honorary doctorate in music. He spoke to a standing room only crowd here at the Memorial Chapel, in which he talked about his long and successful career. When we sat down, I started off by asking him what it was like to work with Walt Disney.
Well, that's a great question because, you know, Walt Disney was one of a kind. There was nobody else like him. He was an inspiration. He was an incredible man. He gave us sensational assignments. My brother Bob and I worked together as a team for Walt Disney for many years. And it was always kind of a challenge. By the same token, it was very, very exciting because he would tell a story, for example, and you could almost feel what he wanted, what he wanted to have in his, the way he spoke to you, the way he expressed himself. His face was very expressive. And it was a joy working. All of us that worked for Walt Disney for those years, those many, many years, were inspired by him. He was a very remarkable man.
What was a typical day like at the Walt Disney Studios?
Typical day, I'll give you off the top of the head. A phone call would have come, say 2 days earlier. Walt wants you to come in at 10 o'clock, we're having a meeting, you know, something like that. Okay, so the secretary would leave a message for us, and we were staff writers, so when you're a staff writer, you do it. You're just there. So we would be there, and we'd find, oh, there's several animators and a couple of story men are in the room with you. Oh, I think it must be something to do with an animated picture. That's the way you sort of figure it out. You don't know what it is. And then I'm giving you an example of something that actually took place. And one day, we were sitting there, and several of us, and Walt came in, and he said, okay, how many of you guys read Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book? And like kids that didn't do their homework, nobody raised their hand, and nobody had read it, you know. So I remember I volunteered at that time. I said, well, I saw a movie with Sabu in it, this Indian young actor about Jungle Book. He said, yeah, I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about the book itself. So he said, no, we didn't read the book. And nobody had read the book. And Walt said, good, I don't want you to read the book. I want to tell you the story the way I want to tell Kipling's Jungle Book the Disney way. And then he proceeded to tell what the world knows now and loves as the Disney version of Jungle Book. It isn't the Jungle Book of Rudyard Kipling. That was Walt. And he just lit us all up with these discussions. And for example, in our case, he was talking about this, the kidnapping is a very dark story where the little Mowgli, the boy, is kidnapped by these apes, the jungle, the head of the apes, and it was a terrifying scene. And he said, I want you to have fun with it. You know, how do you have fun with a kidnapped little boy, terrified, kidnapped by a bunch of monkeys for an ape? And so he said, okay, we'll try to have fun with it. So I remember we were back in our room looking at these sketches of what the storyman had come up with, and we said, what does an ape actually do? I said, well, an ape he sort of scratches himself a lot, and he grunts a lot, and he sort of he sort of grunts like that, and also he swings in a tree, you know. So remember we said he swings in a tree. Hey, the ape could be the king of the swingers because he was the king of the apes. So let's make him the king of the swingers. What? That's a jazz man, right? So all of a sudden we had the idea of doing a jazz number. We didn't have any idea what we were going to do. We started playing with the idea of doing a jazz number. Now the world knows the song as I Want to Be Like You, and we're going to be doing it in this show today. And but at the time, that was the birth of and it all came out of a story meeting with Walt Disney where he described this ape. He played him. He did the whole thing, scratching himself and all that, and making funny faces and grunting. And we said, well, you know, ooh, 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 I want to be like you, ooh, ooh. I mean, just screwing around with that. That was Walt Disney. So this is an example of the kind of meetings we had. We'd have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of meetings on television shows and animated films and feature films, you know, all that type of thing was always direct discussion with the boss to start with, to show what he was looking for. He would set you off on a course.
Describe some of the struggles that you went through before you became successful.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing about success. I never think about it as success. It's just that all of a sudden you got lucky, because we tried so hard, my brother Bob and I, to write our pop songs, and we were doing things. And one day a little girl came into our lives named Annette Funicello. Annette was a mouseketeer. She worked for Walt Disney, and she was one of 24 kids that were very nice, talented kids that did this show on television. You might have seen reruns later on, but this was a very hot show at the time. And Annette was one of the most popular ones. And we were lucky enough to, a song that we had written was selected for her to record and became a big hit. And then the people at the recording company said, "Have you fellas got any more songs for Annette?" And we said, "Sure we do. Are you kidding?" Now that's a bit of luck, you know. We had endured the tough business of music for 8 years trying to get that one moment. Oh, we had a lot of recordings made, but nothing very successful. But this was a connection with somebody that we didn't realize this, but she was directly connected to Walt Disney himself. And Walt Disney loved Annette. She was a wonderful girl. He had discovered her, a 12-year-old, natural, wonderful kid, and everybody, he knew she had star quality, and so he groomed her. Now Bob and I started writing songs for Annette after the big success of a first song that she recorded commercially, and that was Tall Paul, He's My All. That was our song, Tall Paul. And so we started writing a lot of songs for Annette, and Walt, we didn't know this, heard everything that she recorded, and we were doing all kinds of songs for her. And so one day he was going to put her in a film, and he said, "Get those young brothers who are doing the," well, young brothers, you know, it's a long time ago. He said, "who are writing these songs for Annette, maybe they'll take a shot at doing a song for her for this film I want to do." And he liked, I'm making it brief, he liked the song very much, and he gave us more assignments. And each time we came in with the right song for him, he liked it. So one day he handed us a book, and it was called Mary Poppins. And he said, "Read this and tell me what you think." And that was the beginning of my success story, as you say.
What does success mean to you, and what does songwriting, how does songwriting play into that?
I always wanted to be a songwriter from the time I was a young man. I love music. I love particularly songs. Words of music together were something magical. And it was a calling for me. My father was a popular songwriter. He was a very successful one in the 20s and 30s. And so in the 50s and 60s, and when I was in high school and college, I loved that sort of thing. And it was my calling. It was just a reason for me. I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to be a doctor, a lawyer, Indian chief. I didn't want to be a stockbroker. I didn't want to do anything but writing songs. People would sing them. That would give me a lot of joy. And it does. And to this day, I am so thrilled when people are singing my songs and they say they love them and they enjoy them and everything. That makes me feel good. And that's my great joy in life.
What does this honor of the University of Redlands giving you the honorary doctorate in music, what is that? How does that make you feel?
Oh, it's a giant honor. It's a big thing. I feel warm all over. I'm very, very proud of it. I'm very happy about it. And having met the administration and all the various wonderful people that I've met, they're all so great. It's a very great feeling to have being acknowledged like that. I know everybody should get it. I hope everybody gets one of those doctorates one day.
What is one of your favorite stories to tell of all time?
There's so many stories, but I think if there was one moment in my life that really was major, Bob and I had been given this book, Mary Poppins, and in one of the chapters was an old lady who sells breadcrumbs on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, and we wrote a song about it, and it was called "Feed the Birds," 2 a bag. It meant it doesn't take much, 2 is 2 pennies, to give a kindness, to give love, to give caring. And that was the door to the whole story of Mary Poppins, the way we saw it. The father was too busy at the bank, the mother was too busy with her cause, the children were running wild, and Mary Poppins comes into their lives and teaches the family to feed the birds. Now, we wrote this song without ever saying any about that to Walt Disney, but when we played it for him the first time, he listened to it, and then we were playing several other things. And he said, play me that bird lady thing again. So we didn't have the whole song finished, but we played part of it. And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, that's the key to the whole story, right? We said, that's right, Walt, that's right. Yeah, that's right. He says, you fellas think story. How'd you like to work here? And that's the day he put us under contract as his one and only songwriting staff. And we wrote songs for the studio for something like 10 years, almost exclusively. And it was the greatest break of my life. So I'm very fond of that song. It became Walt's favorite. And of course, it's very special to me.
How did you and your brother approach each film score?
With terror. We always wanted to do a good job. We always wanted to do something very special, and we never took anything for granted. And there's nothing more terrifying than the blank page when you have no idea. So we would talk a lot. We would talk about what's the attitude, why do a song? Is there necessary for it? Can we encapsulate a lot of thoughts in one few phrases? And all these things would come into our mitt, and we'd think about it and throw ideas back and forth. And it was like a intellectual ping pong. We throw things and spark somebody. Somebody would say one thing, is that we could do that, and we could change it to do this. And so it all started with story, idea, character, and that would sort of push us into what kind of melodic line we'd use and everything. It was a sort of intellectual approach.
Is there any projects that you want to take on now? Is there one thing that you have to get done?
Well, it's always the challenge. If somebody comes up with something very interesting, they need something, they want something. I just been asked, we're doing a new Jungle Book, talking about Jungle Book, which is CGI, and it's with just one live actor, and all the rest are just electronically animated characters. And it's great, I've seen a lot of it. And they needed some special new lyrics and wonderful things they needed. And it was a big challenge for me. I loved that. So that makes me happy. I still write, I still enjoy writing, composing, doing things like that.
What advice do you have for aspiring composers or songwriters?
Well, I have one piece of advice, which I mean, never lose faith in yourself. Keep going and keep trying. No matter what else you do to stay alive, to stay fed and clothed and housed, but you must keep true to your dreams. And don't let anybody discourage you. Keep trying, keep submitting, keep doing what you can to get your stuff heard and seen and heard. And that's what it's important. That's the important thing. And someday, one day, somebody will say, hey, I like that song. Who wrote that?
Mm-hmm. One final question for you. What has it been like to have this relationship with the Disney family for all of these years?
Well, it's funny, but it's like family now. I know so many of the family, and many of them are gone, but it's very special. We became kind of family when we worked for Walt, and we were very closely associated during his lifetime. And when he's been gone so many years, I still work and do things for the Disney Company and for the Walt Disney Family Museum up in San Francisco, which is an incredible place. Everybody's got to visit this, and it's a nice feeling. I feel I'm part of the Disney family.
Well, you're part of the Redlands family for sure. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much
Proud to
for
be
coming.
part.